Welcome to the lecture Adrenal Function and Herbs to Help with Stress. In the next 15 minutes, we are going to aim to explore how emotional responses to external factors, for example fear, impact on physiological function. We're going to examine the nature of the fight and flight response. We're going to highlight the connection between stress and disease. We're going to describe the structure and function of the adrenal glands and introduce the concept herbal adaptogen and name some herbs to support adrenal function. This is a schematic diagram of the adrenal axis. What we've got up here is the hypothalamus. This is the point in the brain where external stimuli are registered. So something scary happens in the outside world and fear is registered here in the hypothalamus. What happens next is that releases chemicals that are registered on the anterior pituitary, which is a different part of the brain, which again releases more chemicals that circulate through the bloodstream and end up hitting the receptors on the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands produce a cascade of different chemicals that create the physiological effects that we associate with the fight and flight response. These chemicals continue to circulate around the body and they'll either be part of a negative feedback system, so they'll be back up at the pituitary or the hypothalamus and messages will be sent to stop releasing those chemicals, or they're going to be passed through the liver and broken down and excreted. Just to put those in context, again, just where they are in your body, you've got the hypothalamus, you've got the anterior pituitary, and here are the adrenals. The adrenals sit on top of the kidneys, and what we've got is an inside bit and an outside bit. The inside part is called the adrenal medulla, and the outside bit is called the adrenal cortex. 3 different groups of hormones are released from the outside bit, the adrenal cortex. They include mineralocorticoids, for example aldosterone, responsible for sodium-potassium regulation, responsible for peeing. The glucocorticoids, and these are the ones we're quite interested in, hydrocortisone, cortisol. These are responsible for glucose regulation and anti-inflammatory response. Also, slightly as a by-the-by, but it's important and part of the bigger picture, also produced in this outside part of the adrenals, it's a secondary site for producing some sex hormones, estrogens and androgens. The middle part of the adrenals produce adrenaline and noradrenaline. So focusing simplistically on 3 of these, when adrenaline, noradrenaline and cortisol are released, the body responds in the following ways. Heart rate is increased, breathing is faster, fats and glucose are released for energy, blood flow is diverted from non-essential areas to the muscles and to the brain, perspiration is increased, and the immune system is suppressed. Why? What is the point of these physiological responses? We're going to explore this through a story. Meet Ronald. Ronald is a Paleolithic character who lived in the southeast, probably around about Tottenham, somewhere about 40,000 years ago. He particularly likes to hunt woolly mammoth. In our story, Ronald gets wind that there's a woolly mammoth in his area. Now this could be really useful for him. This could be months of food for his community. This could be warmth and clothing, and this could mean tools if only he is able to kill the woolly mammoth. Of course, this isn't a straightforward task. You don't just walk out and kill a woolly mammoth. You have to build up to it. You have to be brave. You have to be clever. You have to be strong. So what Ronald does is spends a few days chanting and psyching himself up. He's dancing, He takes lots of different herbs to make him feel stronger and braver. He spends a little bit of time preparing and focusing for this particular struggle. He knows it's going to be a big deal. Now, what happens in our story is that as Ronald builds himself up, prepares, gets ready, gets really psyched up, starts to feel really brave and ready for a big adventure, something unexpected happens. He goes out ready to search the woolly mammoth, and then suddenly and unexpectedly he bumps into the woolly mammoth before he was ready to take him on. Now, in this story, what happens? Ronald steps back in absolute amazement, and as he does so, he impales his leg on a branch. He's backed into a corner. This is terrifying. He evacuates his bowel in horror, and his heart is beating like a drum. But then he finds that time has gone into slow motion. Actually, he is beginning to think very clearly. Surprisingly, he's not feeling any pain, and he's not feeling any fear. He is able to act very quickly. He looks the woolly mammoth in the eye. He grasps his thigh, unimpales his leg, puts his foot down, dashes between the woolly mammoth's legs, and runs home very, very fast. When he gets home, he's shaking with fear. His foot has swelled up like a balloon. The pain is kicked in, and boy, it hurts. He wants to go and lie down, which is what he does. Luckily, his mother knows a thing or two about medicine. She stops the bleeding with some yarrow. She draws the pus with marshmallow powder, prevents further infection, and promotes healing with mugwort and plantain infusions. She sets the broken bones with comfrey root plaster and makes him some nourishing chicken soup. Let's have a look at what happens to Ronald in a slightly more physiological way. What's happening underneath his responses? Well, the moment the disaster strikes, he's evacuated his bowel in horror. This is a brilliant thing because this means the blood supply can be diverted away from his digestion and be utilised where it is needed. His heart was beating like a drum. That means the blood supply is being moved very quickly to where it is needed. His blood vessels have become constricted to facilitate this process even further. The time going into slow motion is harder to explain, but the thinking very quickly, acting very quickly, and the running very fast is a consequence of the blood supply being diverted to these essential functions, the brain and the muscles. This is facilitated through the increased heart rate and the vasoconstriction. That means the narrowing of the blood supply. The not feeling fear and the feeling no pain and his immune system being turned off. What's this about? Well, fear is something that we've evolved with to protect us from danger. Sometimes it may be useful to suspend fear in order to deal with an emergency. Inflammation and pain are necessary aspects of our immune response to injury, but again, in the very short term, it may be useful to suspend both in order to stay and fight or to make a quick getaway. When he gets home, this adrenal response, these lack of fear, lack of pain, this suspension in his normal protective functions is resolved and it's restored. So he starts to shake with fear, his foot swells up, the pain kicks in, he goes and lies down. He's safe and the danger has been removed and his body chemistry is returning to a normal equilibrium. The fight and flight chemicals are no longer being produced, they're broken down and he's able to take steps to help himself recover. This is a story of an adrenal response happening just as it is supposed to. We have an evolved adrenal response that can be life-saving. consider this response again, but in a little bit of a more modern context. Here's Ronald again. He now, or this is son of Ronald, I should say, he no longer hunts woolly mammoths. He lives in Tottenham, but he goes to work in the city every day. He's got a very stressful job. He travels up on the tube. He gets up very early, but he never gets a seat. He feels claustrophobic. People are always pushing and shoving. It's very hot and horrible on the tube. When he gets to work, he's bullied by his boss. Often, he might feel like fighting his boss, but obviously that's inappropriate office behaviour, so he bites down his feelings. He doesn't go hunting and gathering, even to his local supermarket, because he's so stressed and so busy and so caught up in his lifestyle, he doesn't have time to cook properly. He lives on ready meals and donuts. What this means is that his adrenal response is chronically stimulated. It doesn't just go up and down in a whoosh. It's half on most of the time. His blood supply is moving away from his digestion to his muscles and brain constantly. His heart is always beating fast. His immunity is suppressed or doesn't quite know if it's on or off. He's constantly releasing emergency glucose into his bloodstream. The impact of this is that he has irritable bowel. He isn't digesting and absorbing nutrients. He's got migraines from vasoconstriction. He's heading for a heart attack. And he has a very low immune response. He can't sleep, and he's very overweight. Not only this, but his adrenal function is depleted. That means his ability to respond to stress is suboptimal. It's not functioning as best as could because the chemicals that are in there ready to be released are constantly being diminished and never get the opportunity to be replenished. Perhaps this leads to adrenal exhaustion. This is a fairly typical example of what many people experience in 20th century Western life. Luckily, in herbal medicine, we have remedies to deal with the physiological consequences of chronic heightened adrenal response. And we also have herbs that seem to specifically support adrenal function. Of course, if Ronald visited a herbalist, it wouldn't just be about the herbs. He would be encouraged to change his lifestyle. He would be encouraged to improve his diet. He would be given herbs that help all the individual systems. He might be given digestive herbs, he might be given cardiovascular herbs to bring down his blood pressure, he might be given herbs to help him sleep. He would also specifically be given herbs to support his adrenals. These herbs are called adaptogens. Now this isn't a medical term, it's accepted by some and not others, it's a little bit controversial. It's certainly not a traditional term because traditionally people didn't understand the nature of adrenal function. They talked in terms of tonics and rejuvenators and longevity. It was coined in the 40s as a pharmacological term for a substance that promotes homeostasis. Homeostasis means the body's drive to always take itself back to a balanced place, a place of equilibrium. The concept of adaptogens was developed in the 80s by Chinese and Russian researchers who were investigating the impact of herbs in increasing the body's resistance to stress. There's probably an endless list of herbs that have adrenal response, but because it's a modern concept, there's a limited number that have been investigated in that way. Some of them that you might know would be nettle seed, Panax ginseng, Siberian ginseng, that's the Eleutherococcus senticosus, Glycyrrhiza glabra, that's licorice root, Withania somnifera, ashwagandha root, Schisandra chinensis, borage and rhodolia. We're going to have a look at these herbs a little bit more closely in our video, and hopefully we can explore the subtleties of these on the forum. Thank you for listening.